For many, life on a tropical island seems like a real paradise. Clean sandy beach, palm trees, warm ocean, girls and no worries. Something like in the famous advertisement for chocolate bars, Bounty. However, the realities of island life can be much more prosaic than even the most pessimistic ideas of ordinary inhabitants. As proof of this, the history of Pitcairn Island, which for more than 2 centuries has witnessed all the realities of the difficult life of people on a piece of land with an area of 4.5 square kilometers, lost in the Pacific Ocean. Pitcairn Island is the state with the smallest population in the world, with only 49 people living here. Pitcairn has a surprisingly compelling history. It was founded by rebels from the Bounty who fled from English justice. Then the island experienced the worst alcohol trip and genocide known to mankind. As a result, only 1 man survived. Then this microstate was ruled by a series of rogues and lunatics. And in the year 2004, it became famous as the country with the highest percentage of pedophiles and male prisoners in the world. 50 people. And how many events? Polynesians used to live here, but they died out without the help of Europeans. As early as the 11th century, Polynesians settled on Pitcairn. Apparently Tahitians, they founded a settlement here, brought domestic animals and, in general, settled down quite well. Pitcairn has a supply of quality stone and obsidian. So the first Pitcairn lived by trading with the inhabitants of Mangareva Island, 500 kilometers away. Perhaps they swore allegiance to the king of Mangareva. The happy life of the Polynesians lasted for 100 years. Then the supply of obsidian ran out, and a civil war began on Mangareva. Without trade, Pitcairn society withered and then died out. When the first Europeans arrived here, the Polynesians were no longer here. The history of Pitcairn began with a mutiny on the Bounty. This is the story of the rebellious sailors and their descendants. In 1787, Britain sent the Bounty to the Pacific on a mission to find the breadfruit tree. The British had recently lost the American colonies and were panicking. They still had important colonies in the Caribbean, but there could also be a revolt due to hunger. The local soil was not very suitable for the cultures familiar to Europeans. Then the British decided to plant breadfruit in the West Indies. For this, the Bounty was sent to the Pacific Islands. The Bounty mission failed. Captain Bligh brought the ship to the shores of Tahiti, where it turned out to be very good. Even too good, the sailors were received with open arms. The local girls were very loving. The crew of the ship lived here for a good 6 months and returned to the sea with reluctance. Soon a riot broke out. On April 28, 1789, the sailors landed Bligh and his assistants on a fragile boat in the middle of the ocean, and they themselves returned back to Tahiti. After a while, some of the sailors realized that retribution awaited them for the rebellion. They boarded the Bounty and sailed off to try living on the uninhabited Pitcairn. They were led by Fletcher Christian. As a matter of fact, same person who rebelled against Bligh. The rest of the sailors stayed on Tahiti and paid the price. British justice once overtook them. Someone was hanged. Someone was sent to hard labor, but Christian's team escaped. True, life on Pitcairn was not as heavenly as in Tahiti. The worst event in the history of Pitcairn was the invention of moonshine. Pitcairn Island was settled in 1790 with the following composition: 9 European sailors, including Christian, 6 lower caste Tahitians, basically slaves, and 12 Tahitian women. Moreover, each of the Europeans got a woman, but 6 slaves, only 3. As you can see, the seeds of discord were planted before the colony was founded. Like the Polynesians in the 11th century, the new settlers appreciated Pitcairn. There were many fertile lands, fresh water, and even a heavenly climate. Drinking was the main problem. One sailor, McCoy, learned how to make moonshine from the Swedish tea root that grows here. It was a truly diabolical invention that led to genocide. Crew Bandy drank violently. Christian stepped aside from leadership and fell into anguish. Pitcairn, as the owner of the moonshine still, began to rule McCoy. He turned out to be the worst kind of tyrant, a drunken tyrant and a mediocre leader. Once he sent one of the women fishing a beauty named Tavarua, and when she caught not enough fish, he bit off her ear in a drunken feat. The woman committed suicide by jumping off a cliff, and McCoy, as if nothing had happened, went to his slaves for a new one. An attempt to take one of the 3 wives from 6 already angry men turned into a massacre. The Tahitian men decided to exterminate the Europeans. They carefully planned the action. They stole muskets and edged weapons from McCoy and his henchmen and tracked down the sailors one by one. In just a few hours, they managed to kill almost everyone. At many were decapitated. The only four left were Adams, Ian, Gwendol, and, ironically, McCoy, who started the whole mess. As a result of the insane massacre on Pitcairn, only one man survived. So the year was 1793. Tavarua committed suicide because McCoy bit off her ear. And the rebels killed 5 of the 9 sailors from the Bounty. But that was only the beginning. That same night, the Tahitian women killed all the Tahitian men in their sleep. The remaining male Europeans after these events slightly clouded their minds. Young man Adams began to pray fervently and study the Bible. 4 days on end, Gwendol drank himself and turned into a maniac, who also tried to kill the Pitcairn children. And there are already a lot of them. The remaining men decided that they did not need infanticide here and beat Gwendol to death. After that, McCoy went to a rock by the sea and hanged himself. Soon Yan also died, either as a result of a mental shock or because of asthma. Adams was the only man left on the island. He reluctantly had to become the patriarch of Pitcairn, although initially he was not a very strong-willed man, and even relatively young. In the history of Pitcairn, there have been more rogue dictators than other empires. Given the history of settlement, it is not surprising that rogues ruled Pitcairn more than once. First there was Christian, who drank himself, fell into the blackest melancholy and spit on his duties. Then McCoy, who ruled the island like a true bootlegger. Then a cartel of 4 men, one hanged himself, and one was beaten to death. Well, Adams turned out to be a controversial guy. It is believed that Young did not die himself, but Adams killed him. And against the backdrop of responsibility and read the Bible, he decided to become a theocratic leader. Adams imagined himself an Adam among the Eves, and Pitcairn a paradise that sinful humanity almost lost. The next decades were spent trying to create an ideal Christian society. The Pitcairn patriarch read scriptures to his flock, conducted rituals in his own way, strictly followed morality, broke the moonshine still, and produced a bunch of children. Half of all Pitcairns are his direct descendants. When, in 1808, British ships sailed to the shores of Pitcairn, they discovered a pastoral religious community headed by a gray-haired, handsome Guru. The British liked it that over time, Pitcairn began to be perceived as an island of virtues and the embodiment of Victorian morality. After Adams' death, naive Pitcairns often fell into the power of crooks. One day, the adventurer George Knopp sailed here and quickly became the leader of the community. He was a veteran of the war in Chile and a very charismatic man, although also not without quirks. Later, Pitcairn fell into the hands of Joshua Hill, who claimed to be an emissary of the crown and appointed governor of the island. Hill expelled Knops and everyone who dared to doubt his regalia, built himself a palace, in fact just a barn, demanded honors, and generally behaved as if he were the king of Britain himself. Then the deceit was revealed, and the usurper was expelled in disgrace. But this did not stop the Pitcairns from falling under the spell of a new adventurer, Jaunty, a Seventh-day Adventist who baptized the island's population in his faith, to light to the locals that Adventism was already accepted in England, and Pitcairnians, as good citizens, now also need to join this church. The islanders did not suffer from this, but he became the leader for a while and ordered all the pigs to be exterminated, as required by his faith. Pigs were sorry, but if Victoria accepted Adventism, what to do? The inhabitants of Pitcairn are still adherents of this teaching, despite the fact that in the 19th and 20th centuries, Pitcairn was called the stronghold of Victorian morality in the Pacific. Or maybe because of this, the state has an outrageous number of pedophiles. But this is not difficult. With a population of 50, one is enough to rank first in the world in terms of statistics. However, there were 8 of them in 2004. 7 Pitcairns were convicted of sex with minors, rape, and child abuse. Among them was the mayor of Pitcairn, Steve Christian, a descendant of the same Fletcher Christian, the organizer of the riot on the Bounty. In the year 2006, the guilty were put behind bars, and specifically for this, a prison had to be built on the island. In 2010, they were released, but another one was immediately caught. The new mayor, Mike Warren, he was caught with a 15-year-old girl who was actually a police officer. Now they prefer not to mention these criminal cases. For Pitcairns, this is a painful topic. Pitcairn is now the last British colony in the Pacific, and Several adjacent uninhabited islands are the last British possessions. In the Pacific, de facto the island is independent, but formally it is part of the Commonwealth. Britain is responsible for the protection of the island and justice. It is curious that back in 1838, when Pitcairn officially became a colony, it introduced a democratic electoral system for all adult residents. Thus, it became the first territory in Britain in which women received the right to vote. In the year 1937, 233 people lived here. This was the maximum population. Now 49 people live there. Almost all youth immigrated to New Zealand and Australia. 80% of the current budget comes from tourism. So, visitors are loved here. There is no hotel here. So when you come here, you will live as a guest of one of the locals. The main thing is not to think about the case of pedophiles and the massacre of 1793. They don't like such talk here.